Hi, my name is Sarah Brockwell, and this video is for teaching disciplinary literacy, and it is for the project lesson plan evaluation. And the lesson plan that I chose was the 7th grade science lesson on constellations. And the goals here for the lesson are students will be able to identify constellations by looking at star charts. There will be a reading component with myth stories and how constellations were created. Also be using various reading strategies for that. And then the students will create their own myth about how a constellation was created, and they'll get a chance to draw that. And so the first question that we were asked to evaluate was, does the lesson plan contain a writing component? And does that component require students to communicate through, as in my case, writing as a scientist? And if they were using this within their discipline, is it more real world? And I would say most definitely. Here, written in italics, is the section taken from the lesson plan, and where students are to create their own myth, they are to write like a scientist, and or using the myths and the star constellations, and where they're using the star constellations would be more of like writing like a scientist, because they would need to know reference points, and specifically here the North Star. And even actually they say in years to come the North Star won't be our reference point, but that's like 22,000 years from now. So does the lesson plan require students to interact at some point as an intellectual community? Do they share their knowledge, learning, findings using the language of the discipline? And multiple opportunities in this lesson plan, and that's why I liked it so much, for students to interact and discuss and to use the language of science, because some of the prerequisites were knowing star constellations and how to read a star constellation map. And so group discussions about the constellations in regards to the star chart. The lesson plan included a word splash on a PowerPoint, and then the students could do a think, pair, share and talk about, those words, and have a chance to even discuss those in the class as a whole. And then there's also opportunities to share their findings and learning with the paired reading, and this allowed them opportunities to talk and discuss what they learned. Also, that I did not add here was at the end of the lesson they present their project, which includes the constellation and the myth that they created. On this one, does the lesson plan include a project-based activity? Are they doing the work that a real scientist, mathematician, historian would do in the real world? And this one was a little iffy to me, but taking the definition of project-based learning from Wikipedia, I would say yes, because they're creating a constellation. The only thing is they're not using new constellations. So they're not creating a new constellation based on a different reference point, such as the North Star. Now the morals don't necessarily fall into science or math or historians, but being able to point out those stars in the sky are definitely something that real world scientists do. And as I noticed, or as I mentioned earlier, as our Earth or our solar system, our galaxy, keeps moving through space, eventually what we see this day and time won't be. So there will be a need for scientists to, notice different constellations. But I also added a picture here where some projects include a hands-on component where the students can actually create these constellations using small marshmallows and toothpicks, and I think I would do something different like that, maybe even allow them to snack on the marshmallows just to give it a little more. But overall, I do feel like this is problem-based because you do have to come up with a moral, and then it must fit the constellation that they chose. The ultimate evaluation: does the lesson require the student to think like a scientist? Yes. If you look at this image here that I found, design, be curious, measure, find problems, think out loud, read, solve problems, research, learn, identify problems, look closely, share ideas, ask questions. So yeah, there is a lot of opportunities for students to think like a scientist in this lesson. And then the conclusion of my assignment. Overall, I felt like this was a quality lesson plan. As I mentioned before, there was an area where I would have put a little more time in and had them construct maybe a new constellation and create that constellation using marshmallows and toothpicks, just to throw something different in there to actually have them understand what a constellation is, why we have those constellations, and that's because our Earth completes one revolution in a year's time, and we see different patterns. And so I would definitely either have them create something knowing that there's maybe on Mars the reference points are different, just something to give it a little different component. But overall, there were a lot of opportunities for students to discuss, to write, to read, and I thought it was a great lesson, especially when you're talking about constellations. And that is my review on the lesson plan assignment.